Hey YouTube, just want to give you a quick introduction as well as a brief walkthrough on Apple's latest concoction of OSX 10, version 10.9 Mavericks. Today's October 22nd. It was released this morning, and I was quite eager to come home to install it on an older Macintosh desktop to see whether or not there was any performance impairments, as well as taking advantage of some of the new key features that have been implemented into this version of operating system. So one of the biggest things that I had fears on was performance degradation whenever moving to a new OS. At least in the traditional PC world, that every iteration of latest release of OSs from Microsoft, as an example, resulted in me needing to upgrade my computer or buy a new computer altogether, along with all sorts of headaches like driver incompatibility, poor performing hardware, the list goes on and on. But one thing I can tell you right now that right away when I upgraded OSX Mavericks is that my computer hasn't in fact slowed down. I think it's actually sped up in terms of its overall performance in comparison to what it was like with OSX Mountain Lion. I wouldn't say that the speed improvement is dramatic, but it is certainly, quick enough for me to take notice that it's snappier, and things just load quicker. Surfing the net with Safari is definitely a huge improvement. I've found that web pages load considerably faster, and of course, without a doubt, the appearance of everything has changed ever so slightly, and the changes are actually in fact for better than they are worse. So I'm going to just show you a couple of key things here, to the best of my knowledge, as far as what OSX Mavericks can offer up the user. So guys, let's talk about the first feature that's offered in Mavericks here, and that is actually in fact the Finder. So I don't think the Finder here in OS 10 has been really modified or changed, at least in the last several iterations of OS X that I can recall. And normally in Finder, when we're trying to find our information, we can usually look at things in like the large iconic folder view, list view, column view, and of course cover flow view. And of course how I navigate my information I like is the column view. But what's really neat is that historically, if I wanted to go and look at something, I would have to essentially look at my information in this type of flow. And if I wanted to look up, say, on an alternate hard drive, I would have to then go to File, New Finder window, and then go to another drive and say, okay, I want to look at this content here, and then into these subfolders and so forth. And now in the new revised Finder, you don't actually have to do that. You can actually open up views in tabular form like how you would in Safari. And that makes life a lot better, because at this point, we can now look at multiple instances of our information, different views, if that's what you want to call it, and make life quite easy to sort of cross view everything in a single Finder window. Now, for those that say, well, I don't necessarily like the tabular view. Once I've opened it, I want to open up a Finder window. Do I need to open up Finder like this and then navigate back to what information you were intending to look at? And the answer is no, you don't actually have to. It's a really neat feature of OS X where you simply take your tab, drag it out onto a blank spot on your desktop, and it will actually open up another instance of the Finder window. So I'm not going to talk too much into detail about that, other than it's a great idea. I love it. It makes my workflow a lot easier, and finding information quicker. Another neat feature with the Finder that's introduced in Mavericks is actually a concept taken from Aperture and iPhoto, where we can actually now not only tag our photographs in iPhoto and Aperture, but we can also now take files in our Finder and tag them as well to make organization and searching for documents and sort of any data assets that much easier. So for example, here in my documents, if I want to say, oh, I want to take this document and I want to attach a tag to it, I can now tag it with some key information, say demonstration, and then save that as a tag, and then say label it as green as well. and then basically if I go into Spotlight and type in, say, demonstration, that immediately, my documents here will pop up that have been tagged with that keyword. The other thing too is that in the Finder view, as example, you saw earlier that I had tagged it with the term demonstration as well as the green tag. Well, in the Finder, it'll also give you a quick view of everything that's been tagged green, and so it's pretty interesting that Apple did this, and I can certainly see how there'd be humongous value in the ability to tag documents. And so you can sort of change your tags on the fly, you can update them, you can remove them, and so forth. But I mean, that's fantastic. So for example, if I'm working on a project, say I'm on the green team, but I'm affecting red team as an arbitrary example, and then we'll say budget release, then I can sort of let that save it, and you can see here that it's marked with multiple color tags just for quick view purposes. And if I go into Spotlight, almost instantaneously when I type in budget, that it will actually pull up this report here under the PDF documents side of things. So really handy, and I can see now for productivity work, personal organization, this will be a dream function to have. I certainly love it, and I am the most disorganized individual known to man. So just something that's worth sharing. So the next feature I want to talk about here is the included Apple Maps pack-in with OSX Mavericks. So Maps is sort of very similar to the application that's included on the iOS devices, which sort of covers things like maps and how to get to certain places. And so I'm not too sure from, say, example, a home desktop computer, how useful this might be, but I'm sure those with laptops and those that travel a lot would make great use of this. In the past, if I needed to find directions out of my address book, for example, like this, I'd have to type in this address into Google Maps and then go to and from, and then get my map through the internet. But what's neat is that Apple's got this all packed in as their own application now, and so for the convenience factor, here's an address in my address book of a business, and I just have to go show map, and right away it drops a pin onto where that address was. And what's really cool is that I can actually get directions like this, where of course using location services, it can then map out a navigation trail, giving you different options of how to get to this location from where you're at, driving or walking, how long it'll take, including the distance. So very much like how Apple's iOS maps works. So this is a really neat feature. For those that are wondering where the heck you would use this, well, again, I had mentioned earlier, if you're a business traveler or for a person that travels a lot with a, say, MacBook, and you need to get to all these different locations, this will be quite convenient because it's all built into the operating system. Next, we have a built-in application called iBooks that's now available on your Mac laptop or desktop, and you can actually read content now that you once purchased in the iBooks store on your iOS device. So I remember quite a few years ago when iBooks was first introduced that I purchased it, a magazine or a book of some sort on my iPad, and I thought that I could go on a long flight and read the book on my laptop, and it turns out that at the time OSX didn't support that, and finally Apple has gotten their nonsense together and enabled sort of the equivalent of iBooks on your iOS device onto their desktop/laptop operating system. So that makes things a lot more convenient, and sort of it ties in with sort of Apple's theme of sort of cloud-based computing and shared resources and information and ease of accessibility. So I'm not a big book reader myself, but if you take a look at how the iBook store is now set up, it sure as heck looks a lot like how iTunes is set up today. And so if those that like iTunes and are avid book readers, then you're going to absolutely love how iBooks is set up. So here's another kind of a productivity enhancing feature that's now enabled in the new operating system, and that is an extension of how messages work. So for example, here in messages where I'm sending myself some text messages, I used to have to reply to messages in this sort of reading pane. But now in OSX Mavericks, you can actually do that straight from Notification Center here, where if I click on messages, I can actually send a message directly to, say, someone, just by typing their name and then going, hello, how are you? And then essentially just hit send right out of Notification Center. I know it's a real minor tweak and most people probably think that's fairly inconsequential, but really it's sure as heck beats opening up, multiple instances of, say, messages and seeing all these different things going around and cluttering your desktop. I never thought I would actually use this messaging feature in Notification Center, but I actually do quite a bit, so it's great. So there's another thing about Notification Center here, aside from instant messaging, say to places like Twitter and of course to iMessage, is that much like how Apple has implemented Do Not Disturb in iOS 6 and iOS 7 on their iPads and iPhones, that we can now also set the same exact functionality within Notification Center of your Mac desktop or laptop. So here we can see under the preferences for notification that we can now say Do Not Disturb from so and so period to whatever arbitrary time. And this is useful, say, if you've got your computer in your room, or say, for example, if you're a university student and 6 of your other roommates have a Mac, that Twitter and your friends and Facebook, when they're sending messages to you, that your computers aren't constantly beeping all night long. So again, a really useful feature that I think people don't think too much about until they start using it. So the next major enhancement in OS X is Safari, and some of the key things that they've changed that some either liked or hated the features in. So in previous versions of OS X, i.e. Mountain Lion, before you would have all these different reading panes here that would essentially pick off a cached view of your sort of top viewed websites, and now you actually have the ability to avoid preloading your top hits in the background by going under preferences and then changing those settings now under privacy. So that's really great, because sometimes when you have a shared computer or even a computer in a public place, for example, you wouldn't want sort of your website view being cached in for someone else to see. Another neat thing is that security has been enhanced in Safari, where websites now have a much greater difficulty skimming sort of the cached information on your web browser. So again, it's something that sort of happens seamlessly behind the scenes of Safari, but it's sort of a security enhancement that everyone could appreciate. As far as performance goes, browsing is quite quick. As always with Safari, I've never ever experienced Safari running in a sort of a slow, god-awful, painful manner. But fortunately, the new version of Safari today is actually faster than any version of Safari previously introduced. So there's a few other sort of minor changes here in OS X Mavericks that some people may or may not take notice, and certainly may or may not care. I know I certainly don't. So for example, in Launchpad now, as well as our dashboard, there's no longer that linen view background that was once employed in previous versions of OS X. I believe it's called sucomorphism. And so that's now been removed out of OS X 10.9, and it's really starting to fall in line with how sort of iOS 7 is starting to look like, with the minimalist approach that Johnny Ives have always believed in. I'm not sure if I like it or not. Even if you look at this example, in your contacts, like, gone are sort of the page views and that faux leather that was once a real big thing in Steve Jobs' eyes. Less is more, I think, at this point. So things like calendar, for example, it's a much more simplistic view. It's a lot tidier and it looks a lot more refined. And just overall, the interface just seems like they've taken away some of the visual clout that once existed. So it is worth mentioning, guys, that if you haven't noticed the trend that Apple's been taking, that iOS 7 and OSX Mavericks is starting to converge and look a lot like each other. So, for example, in iOS, there's are key things like messaging, do not disturb, as well as iBooks. That was more geared towards iOS devices is now available in its entirety on Apple's desktop platform. So, for example, I had mentioned earlier in my video that I could read a book that I actually purchased on my iPad, and now I can actually open it up on iBooks on my desktop or MacBook for that matter, and then begin reading my content. For example, Notification Center now, it's a very convenient way of accessing iMessage as well as other push notifications from my other applications or things like Facebook and Twitter, that I can see all of this. I also like the fact that we have the ability now, to set things like a do not disturb function on Notification Center, much like how I do it on my iPhone, at certain times. Now we can also see that some welcome packings also include sort of an improved calendar application that's a lot cleaner and easier to understand, with the ability to set reminders, integrate maps, including travel time to your events, which I couldn't demo on here because I'm having trouble getting it to work properly. The fact that we have Apple Maps now packed into into OSX, which initially I thought, well, how often would we use this? But I mean, I'm certain that it will serve its purposes for mobile users that travel with their laptops, or those that are trying to plan an event and then want to share, say, directions or printed maps of how to get there from their specific location. So again, quite useful to see how things are sort of mapped out in your location instead of having to go to Google Maps to take a look at it. Safari, improved security, much faster browsing capability. I also failed to mention earlier that there was the ability to do what they call an iCloud keychain, where if you set a password, say on your desktop, to go to a certain website, you can now have that username and password and sort of login credentials transferred over to all your other devices connected to your iCloud account. The ability for it to be able to store credit card form or autofill functionality on websites if you're doing purchases now can be securely stored in Safari. The fact that other websites can't skim data off of the local caches anymore, as well as the fact that, for example, in this website, in this sort of tile view here, that you can now set on your privacy settings and preferences not to load sort of the top hit websites, for the world to see if you don't want people to be, seeing what you're looking at. And of course, the big thing here that is really important to me is that there has been no performance impairments by installing the latest operating system, which cost nothing, onto a 3.5-year-old desktop computer. Unlike a Windows product, I don't need to buy another piece of hardware to continue using my computing environment. Apple has done a phenomenal job in optimizing OpenCL coding in their operating system. So for those that don't know what that means, basically it's now allowing the graphics processing unit now to take off some of those computational requirements of software calls, if that's how I can describe them, off of the central processing unit, so that now the GPU that might potentially be sitting idle, can now take some of that processing work off of the main processor, so that speeds everything up. And of course, in saying that, it also will use your video memory, in that processing function to again further enhance those the speed and performance of your computer. There is also the fact that we now have memory compression capabilities, as well as better power management if you're a laptop or a mobile device user. So what memory compression means is that, for example, here on my desktop, I've got 8 gigs of RAM stored, but now for example, if I have a whole bunch of applications running that say they need 10 gigs of RAM, but I'm physically limited to 8, that the applications that are running in the background or don't need processing resources can actually be compressed so that it frees up memory here to allow the active applications to make better use of system memory. So Apple's really done some thoughtful engineering in making the overall performance of the system behave better. Oh yes, guys, and one more thing. In Safari, it is also worth mentioning too that on websites, for example, if you're viewing say magazines or celebrity gossip websites, more often than not there's a whole bunch of plugins and flash players and content that you meant to go see isn't being seen because of all the noise and garbage that's happening behind like say, I don't know how, I can't pull up a website right now that I can think of, but when I read about celebrity gossip, there's usually videos and things on the side, and of course the content that I want to find is all in between that, and it's just really annoying to try to read and then hit stop on all the different videos that are playing on a site. And of course, if you're using a laptop, that consumes valuable battery power. So the ability of Safari now is that you can actually disable those plug-in players and only go to websites to see content that you had intended to see, and filter out all the junk that is advertising or just background noise. So anyways, in a nutshell, that's sort of a quick walkthrough / overview of OS X 10.9. Don't hesitate to go and install it on your system if you meet the system requirements. I've installed it on a Macintosh from as old as 2008, 2009, a Macintosh Mini in fact, and with only 4 gigs of RAM, and much to my amazement, it actually performs better than when for example, Mountain Lion was running on it. So it's worth a shot. It doesn't cost you anything. You can download it from the Macintosh App Store. So I hope you found this video useful and informative. Rate, comment, and subscribe.